everyone, welcome to Center Makor on YouTube. And today we'll be talking about interesting topic about very interesting organization which actually located here in New England or Greater Boston area. I just want to remind you before we will start that I am Vladimir Foygelman. And I'm presenting Center Makor, and Center Makor is supported by combined Jewish philanthropies, donors, sponsors like you, our viewers. Please, if you would like to support our program and programs of Center Makor, go to centermakor.org and just place your donation. We will be very appreciated, and you will support continuation of Jewish life among Russian-speaking Jews and integration of Russian-speaking Jews into mainstream Jewish community. Again, it's centermakor.org. You can do it right now. Today, I would like to present you very interesting person, our guest, and I hope he will say many interesting things about himself because he's really interesting person. And organization what he's running is very unique and doing, I will say, not just interesting and noble thing, but very seriously very important job with teenagers. So let me introduce you Irving Kempner, head of New England March of the Living. Irv, welcome to Center Makor, to our studio.
Thank you very much for having me as your guest.
And please, first of all, a little bit about yourself. And then we will talk about how it happens that you become involved in such interesting and important movement.
Okay, well, it actually starts with my parents, because both of my parents are Holocaust survivors from Poland. My mother was from Radom, Poland. My father was from Kalisz, Poland. They lost all their family in the Shoah, their parents on both sides, brothers and sisters, and the only first cousin that I would ever have, a 4-year-old who was killed the same day that she arrived in Auschwitz. So these are my Grimm's fairy tales, sort of growing up with these stories without these families. So it has a major effect on you, and you want to understand the nature of anti-Semitism, and you also want to understand, you grow up with the idea of what you can do to prevent it from happening again. My parents came to this country in 1949. In order to get into the country, it was not easy. You had to have both a trade and a sponsor. Both my parents were involved in the garment business. My father was a manufacturer of dresses. My mother was a hat designer. And in fact, after the war, she worked for an ORT school, training other Jewish women so they could also have a trade in order to get into the US or Canada or Australia. And my father was fortunate that he had a friend of his who had come to the United States from Poland in 1938 during the World's Fair and then couldn't return. So he was already here, he had established himself, he had a dress manufacturing facility, and he agreed to sponsor my father and my mother's sister. She only had one sister who survived to come into the country. So those kind of backgrounds make you very attuned to anti-Semitism, to the story of the Holocaust, and also very strong Zionist feelings that part of my family was lucky that they got out before the war. They were part of the fourth wave of the Aliyah that went to Israel in the 1920s. And the ones that stayed in the safety of Poland didn't want to tackle the hard life of Israel. Israel was not then what it is today, a thriving, startup nation. It was not that. There was people had to live in kibbutzim, and there were attacks even back then from Arabs. It was a hard life, not for everybody. So a lot of people made the mistake of returning to the safety of Poland, and we all know how that turned out. They were better off staying where they were. So that was my background. In terms of me personally, I grew up in the New York City, area. Went to Forest Hills High School, then to the University of Miami, then to NYU. I was hired by the Gillette Company, coming out of NYU, and rose to the ranks for the Gillette Company. Had 30 years, 13 jobs, moved 8 times, and retired as the vice president of sales for Gillette North America. Okay? So I ran the U.S., so not bad from, I used to say, from in one generation, only in America can you go from the furnaces of Auschwitz to the Fortune 500 in one generation. God bless America, right, to give us this kind of a unique opportunity. So when I retired in 2005, a good friend of mine who had been involved with the March of the Living, who also was a son of survivors, who I knew quite well from Miami, his parents were from Lithuania, from Kovno.
Oh,
okay.
It was very bad.
So it was a tough situation.
The war.
Yeah, they lost a lot of family, but his personal family was fortunate in that they were put up by righteous Gentiles. They shaved their heads and put crosses on them and made them, you know, look like peasant farm workers. Oh. So he was fortunate that they had saved them. So that's another interesting story, which I will, if we have time, I'll tell you later. But anyway, he got very involved with the March of the Living, which is an international educational trip that started off in 1988 when the Iron Curtain fell, and Poland was once again established as being an independent country and wanted to learn more about its history, because a lot of what happened to the Jews was suppressed by the Soviet Union. The losses, they talked about all the comrades that got lost. They didn't distinguish between, you know, Jews and Gentiles, but that story became more evident. Plus we had a friendly Polish Pope. You know, back then, at that time, Pope John Paul, and he encouraged Poland to open up to address its history, and this organization started to take Jews to Poland to learn about the 1,000-year history the Jews had in Poland, and also to visit the death camps to see how in 6 years it all got eliminated.
So that program was at that time open to everybody? Like any American Jew can join?
And it wasn't open just to America. Currently, there's 52 countries that participate. They wanted an international flavor of the March of the Living. So it was open to, initially, it was a lot of Israelis that came. Because what the Israelis did, they felt it was important for their for their high school kids, before they entered the IDF, to go see what life was like before there was an Israel, before, you know, there was a country, a refuge to go to. And these kids come away much more with conviction that their responsibility is to save not only Israel, but the Jewish people throughout all over the world. You know, like what happened in Entebbe in 1976, right? Yeah. And they flew 5,000 miles round trip to save Jews, right? Yep. That heroic story that we know so well. So they started in Israel, then they spread to a lot of Europe, then to Canada, and to the U.S. and Australia. So currently there's 52 countries that are represented, and it's a wonderful opportunity to go to see those kids, and today with social media to be able to connect with kids from all over the world and have this kind of an experience. But anyway, I didn't know a lot about it. My friend Mel convinced me that now that you have the time, you're no longer working. I had 3 kids. I put them through yeshivas, which was expensive. So, you know, working was the key to put bread on the table. So we accomplished that objective, and now it's time to focus on myself, you know, and the family, and learn. So he convinced me to go. We had it was the first time they had run an adult march. Now the only difference between the adult march and the kids march is we stay in nicer places. So it's a little bit more expensive, because the kids won't stay in youth hostels and things like that. So I had an incredible experience, and I'll just tell you 2 of them that motivated me, because this was my first trip, and I just went as a participant.
You didn't yet.
I wasn't running it. No. I wanted to see. He was trying to he was trying to chop me, as they say in Yiddish, I think, to grab me to come into it. So my mother was still alive. She just passed away this past July at the age of 98, but she was alive in 2005, and she said, "Would you do me a favor?" I said, "What is it?" She said, "If you get to Warsaw and you go to the Warsaw Cemetery," she said, "my grandfather, which is my great-grandfather, is buried there. He died before the war, so he had a normal, he had a normal life and a normal death, a mitzvah, a headstone, and a place to say Kaddish." So she said, "Please go find it, take a picture, and say Kaddish for me." So I said, "Fine." I didn't know what I was going to find. When we get to the Warsaw Cemetery, the Warsaw Cemetery has 250,000 headstones in it. There's more dead Jews in that one cemetery than there are live Jews in Massachusetts, just to put it in perspective, right now. So I was going with these adults. They're going for this tour of this humongous, cemetery that had been overgrown for many years.
15
for all these years.
16th century, I believe.
Yeah, it was. I think they started burying people around 1785, and they stopped in 1939. They picked it up again in 1988, but the place had been, completely neglected. So everybody was going for a tour and taking pictures. I said, I'm going to see the curator, of the place. So it turned out that the curator was a Chabadnik from the Ukraine, okay? And he had taken on this responsibility of mapping every single mitzvah and putting it on a map. So I go into his place. He has a map, 250,000, and he's got a few areas highlighted. And he's speaking to another woman who's like my age with her father, who is a survivor. And he's explaining he's done 25,000 so far in the last 2.5 years. He says, give me your names. I'll put them in the database. I'll see what comes out. So he looks in. Nothing came out for them, so they left. So I said, I'm going to ask you for the same thing. He said, you heard the story I just told him? I said, you've managed my expectations. They're low. See what you could find. Well, my mother had given me 5 names of her grandfather, her grandmother, uncles, etc. All 5 names showed up. We hit the jackpot. Okay, so it was good. It was quite a thrill. So I said, tell me where they are, and I'll go find them. So he's laughing at me because I just walked in. I didn't realize this place is like Gillette Stadium times 4. That you'll never find it. So he said, I have a Levi. I have an unveiling to do. When I'm done with the unveiling, I'll be happy to take you. So I said, he said, can you wait 15 minutes? At that time, I was 55. I said, I waited 55 years. I'll wait another 15 minutes, right? So he comes back in 10 minutes and he says, okay, we can go. So we're running like 2 Michigans, and we passed the 40 people that were just walking over. And I said, what are you doing? He said, he found my great-grandfather. They said, can we come? We said, sure. So we're walking over B'Tsevas and wood, and finally found the place. And then he stopped me, okay? He said, are you a Kohen? So right then and there, if the answer is yes,
you're going back.
I'm going back. So he stopped me because when he saw the B'Tseva.
Yeah, let's explain our viewers why, if you cook and you cannot.
If you're derivative from the Kohens, which are the priests, you're not allowed to set foot in a cemetery unless
according to Jewish law.
According to Jewish law, unless it's for your own, family, for your own immediate family. So the way he knew that is that on top of all these mitzvahs, there's different iconography.
Yeah.
So he saw this.
Yeah, that's the hands of
which is the high priest blessing that they give on the high holidays. And by the way, there are different ones too. Like a Levite, they show water pouring on the feet. For a philanthropist, they show money going in. Mm-hmm. For a woman, they have a candelabra. If she died young, the candles are broken. So everything has symbology, to it. And I didn't know that until I went there. So I said, don't worry. I said, my mother was a Kohen, but she married beneath her. I'm a lowly Yisrael. You could let me in. You could let me go. So we went, we said Kaddish, we took pictures. It was a very, very moving experience. And when we went from there to the chief rabbi of Warsaw's synagogue, the Nozhik synagogue, I went to the bima, I called my mother, and I said, Mom, I found your grandfather. And the two of us cried like babies because I gave something to her. To me, a grandfather doesn't exist. I never met a grandfather. But to her, she had a great grandfather. She sat on his knees. They saw him for high holidays, etc. So that was one experience. The last experience, which really turned me on, was 2005. Was the 60th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz by Russians, right?
Yeah, but Soviet army.
By the Soviet army.
And first, I believe, came office captain. He was a Jew. Mm-hmm. Who came first, stepped into the gates.
Into the gates.
Yeah.
So the March of the Living was significant that we had. It was the 60th anniversary. It was one of the largest contingents. They probably had 23,000 people, which is significant. Usually it's 10 to 14,000, a very big group. And when we complete the march from Auschwitz I to Birkenau, we're there for the ceremony. On the dais was the president of Poland, the president of the Czech Republic, a foreign minister of Germany, and they're waiting for one final person to show up. The one final person to show up was Ariel Sharon. Ariel Sharon flew into the middle of Auschwitz in an IDF helicopter. So picture what I'm telling you, okay? With a Mogen David, with the Star of David on the side of the helicopter, he lands in the middle of Auschwitz. He ascends to the stage and he makes a speech that basically concludes in saying that many people say that we have Israel because of the Holocaust. I want to tell you, had we had Israel, the Jews would have had a voice, the Jews would have had a refuge, the Jews would have had a shield, and we would have prevented the Holocaust. And when he finished saying those words, he'd arranged for a missing man formation of F-15s that flew over the gates of Birkenau and then did a break-off low enough, and they buzzed all the European heads of state when they did that. And I'm telling you, it wasn't a dry eye in the house. I think everybody was weeping at that point. And I was standing next to a young soldier, a young Israeli soldier who was probably about 18, 19 years old. And he was shaking and crying, and he was being consoled by a Holocaust survivor who looked into his eyes and he basically said, Avi, why are you crying? He said, I'm crying because we're 60 years too late. And the Holocaust survivor took Avi's face in his hands, he looked him in the eye, and he said, Avi, because of you, we will never be late again. And that's the message of the march.
Very emotional, yeah.
Okay, that's the message of the march. And the only thing that bugged me is when I went on this march, is I went with my friend Mel Mann, who was from Miami, and I realized I hadn't found there wasn't a single person from Massachusetts, not one person who saw any of the things that I saw. And I said, we have to fix this. And that's how I basically got involved. And the following year, he convinced me to go with him to a kids trip. He says, it's not going to be as fancy. You're going to be staying at youth hostels, but you have to see the impact this has on the kids. So in 2006, we went again. We actually did a film, which is the film that I left with you to look at. We did a documentary with the kids.
Maybe we can show a fragment of this film right now to our audience. What do you say?
You can do that. There is a trailer, so they can get a sure, that would be great. That would be great.
Let's watch it, guys.
We'll watch it.
Feeling very nervous. How come? Because I've never really done anything like this before.
Wait, can I see the questions before just so I can think about it?
This is the March of the Living.
What happened in this trip is we took 150 kids that represented the full spectrum of Judaism. Okay, they were Orthodox, conservative, Reformed, affiliated, unaffiliated, intermarried, the whole 9 yards. And the kids may not have had a lot in common to begin with, but when they were done, they were a community. They were a kahal.
You mean after whole trip, or
well, I would say
Poland?
throughout just going through Poland because when we take them to Poland, we show them communities and synagogues that existed that are now museums.
Yeah,
okay?
because
there's nobody there. And then when they walk through the death camps, it's such an emotional, piece for them. And then, of course, when you fly them from there to Israel, they feel like they were liberated. And that, to me, that's one of the big differences. You could fly from Boston to Israel, and you're going from one modern country to another modern country. But when you go from Auschwitz, is the last thing you saw, and you land on Israel, you kiss the ground. You know, it's a whole different thing. So these kids were supporting each other. And when we got to Israel, an interesting thing happened. We had two girls with us who were sisters, 18 and 16. And these two girls had a Jewish mother and a non-Jewish father, and they raised them with the idea that when you get older, you'll decide
Who you will be.
who you'll be, and you choose.
Usual story.
The usual, it's very, very common American story. So when these kids got to Israel, the first place we went to was the Haas Promenade overlooking the old city. And we had a little breakfast and a shachar service, etc. And that evening we were going to go to Masada, you know, and stay in the youth hostel. In the morning we're going to daven, you know, in the synagogue upstairs. So the girls came to our cantor and said, "Cantor Kula, we have a favor to ask." He says, "What is it?" She said, "When we get to Masada tomorrow, would you arrange for us to be bat mitzvahed on the top of Masada?" So he said, "Really?" He said, they said, "Really?" He said, "Well, how are your parents going to feel about it? How are you?" So they called the mother from the Haas Promenade in Jerusalem and told her. And over the phone, it was like somebody burst a dam. All the emotion that she had, you know, praying that something like this would happen, sort of came out. So in the morning, all the kids got excited. You're not going to teach them a Haftorah, but we taught them the opening and closing blessings of the Haftorah. And in the morning, the kids accompanied them up the snake path. Us out the cockers took the Torah and took up the tram. And I have pictures of it where we're at
And you really climbed up?
No, they climbed up.
Oh,
I said they climbed up. I said I took the tram. We took the tram. Those old guys took the tram. We're waiting for them. But we had a service and we had an open telephone, and we let their parent, their mother, hear the opening and closing blessings. And afterwards, you know, they were lifted up on chairs, and it was an experience. And I said, you know, Mel, you got me. Okay, this is a transformative experience. It's a phenomenal heritage trip. It takes it out of an academic environment and reading about it to physically, you know, seeing it. And, you know, for people in Massachusetts to try to, just a little bit of comprehension, if you haven't been there, to understand what you're going to see. What I tell people is picture in your mind the 495 corridor, okay, going from the Bourne Bridge up to like Newburyport, okay? Just picture, you know, there's an inner beltway, a 128 beltway, and a 495 beltway. Imagine a foreign entity attacked Massachusetts and murdered every single man, woman, and child inside the 495 corridor. Everybody. That doesn't matter what your ethnicity was. That's 3.2 million people, okay? And that's exactly the number of Jews that were killed just in Poland. Just in Poland, 3.2 million people. So all that's left is infrastructure that went supported schools and cemeteries and shuls and shopping areas, etc., and homes. And so you're basically visiting an infrastructure that supported a community for 800 years. And when you physically see it, it has a much greater impact on you than just reading it at the end of the day. So that's basically it. So we came here. I organized a group that had been to we've done a number of trips, and once adults have seen this for themselves, they wanted to help me. And we started raising funds, and we partnered up with a New York, New Jersey group so we could take our kids together on buses. And so now we're in good financial situation. Unfortunately, we didn't have trips in 2020 and 2021 because of the COVID. That's the bad news. The good news is we're still collecting money, so it put us in a good financial position to offer all of your viewers out there a $2,000 scholarship for their teens, not for the adults,
but for teens.
But for
we
teens
talk
to be
here about teens. It's like teenagers program right now.
Juniors and seniors in high school.
It's like 11th, 12th grade or 10th, 11th grade.
It's primarily, I'd say, juniors and seniors. You know, and ideally seniors. I mean, we'll take juniors, but seniors. By the time we go, and the trip for the 2022 is April 24th through May 28th. So April 24th of 2022, by then most seniors are finished with their exams. They know what colleges they're going to go to, so taking off for 2
We
weeks.
like have gap which they can use.
It's a gap, and even if school continues, the point is that their grades are pretty much, you know,
so we're
secured.
all set.
So they're pretty much, well, they already know what schools they're going to for the most part by that time. So it's much less cumbersome for them to do. But what's also important for parents that are viewing us to understand is this is the last thing you can do from a Yiddish point of view to inculcate your kids.
I want to show people, you have very nice pictures of kids from New England March of the Living, and I want you guys to see them right now, like maybe like a gallery a little bit. You will see what's going on there, how kids really together, like they have unity already inside the Poland, and especially at Auschwitz, and you can see their faces and faces. One face, I believe it's in Israel, another in Poland and Auschwitz, and absolutely another face when they arrive to
darkness
Israel.
to light. Now, we tend to cover 3 Jewish holidays every time we go. So the week of Poland is the week leading up to Yom HaShoah,
The day of remembrance.
the Day of Remembrance.
No, it's a day of
The Holocaust, the
Yes,
Holocaust,
sorry.
okay? But then we have, in Israel, there's 2 Jewish holidays. One is Yom HaZikaron
That's
and Yom
the day of
HaTzmaut.
remembrance.
So Yom HaZikaron is to remember, but it's a memorial day for the soldiers that died between 48 and today. And it's a very solemn...
And victims of the terror as well.
and victims of terror. It's a very solemn day. If you're there at like 12
I was
noon,
there.
you know, they set off a siren.
Yes.
Everybody pulls to the side of the road. Everybody stands at attention, and it's complete.
And I saw it not only what they pulled out to the road, I saw how the cars, motorcycles, bikes stopped at the spot the siren sounded, and they like whole picture in front of you like froze completely. No movement at all. No movement at all. Everything still. And then 1 minute later, again,
Activities back to life, exactly. So they get a chance to see that, which is really significant. Also, oftentimes we send them to a local Jewish community where there's a memorial ceremony, because virtually every community has been touched.
Every town, every city. Yeah.
By that. So you get a chance to see how they memorialize their fallen. And it's, you know, unlike here, Memorial Day is a shopping day, you know, a day to get sales. There they take it very seriously. They really honor their soldiers. The other thing they do is the day after Memorial Day happens to be Yom HaTzmaut, which is Independence Day. So that is a very freilich, you know, simcha, you know, kind of experience. There's barbecues and music going on and concerts, and it's a wonderful experience. So what's interesting is they're back to back. So you're commemorating the losses that occurred to make Israel a country, and then you're celebrating the birth of the country. And to see that and be a part of it is just marvelous.
Yeah, it's very emotional experience.
It's an emotional experience. And we have a big concert at Latrun, which is the tank place at concerts, etc. And then the following day, they fly home with this wonderful feeling. So we leave them with a
you fill them in with inspiration, and go back.
And then go back and go to college, and then get involved with Hillel, AJC, APAC, whatever you want to do. So, because usually at the end they say, well, what do we do with all that? So I say, be involved, be a proud Jew, find something that, get involved with Senator Makor, you know, whatever it happens to be. But do something with your life that's significant, be proud of who you are, understand where you came from and where you're going.
Yeah, that's the most important thing, because we had, right now it's postponed until also 2022, and with question mark maybe. family exchange program with between Russian-speaking families in Haifa and Boston, and that program was running for 13 years without stopping, with big success. Was also kids become, but we got kids by 14 years old, the oldest one, the 15 maybe. And even at that moment, when kids came out from Israel with bar bat mitzvah at the Western Wall, it was amazing for them. After Masada, it looked like we cracked them completely. And they always saying, most of them, let's say not everybody, but most of them were saying, I am proud to be a Jew. And with that, they coming back and also started to participate in more active Jewish life, maybe not so with Makor, but they go to temples near them to join congregations. And that's a really good experience. But when I've met you and I learned about this that movement, trip, I will not really say it is trip, it's a movement.
It's a heritage experience.
Yes, heritage experience, because for Russian-speaking Jews, Holocaust is not just a symbol, because each and every one of us has somebody in their family perished during Holocaust or World War II, as a soldier or as a Jew, as a victim. And that makes a Russian-speaking experience unique, because we really have people for whom we may be ready to fight back, and we will never forget them. They're part of the family.
Sure.
It's very important, and we don't have so many Holocaust survivors in Soviet Union, you know. We have people who survived because of they evacuated to Asian part of the Soviet Union, but here in who left in occupied territory, practically nobody survived. Because there was no camps where they were shooting people on.
Sandsgruppen came in behind the Wehrmacht and killed people.
Yeah.
Just took them out, have them dug their graves, and did that. It was awful.
That's why I encourage you to go with that trip with New England March of the Living, because also that's important thing. This year we mark big anniversary of one of the biggest tragedies in the World War II, in the Holocaust. It's a Babi Yar. It has started on September 29th of 1941. And, you know, all Kiev Jews were forced to gather together, and they went, and then I heard that story what young woman asking old Jew, they walking toward Babi Yar, Grandpa, where are we going to? Where they taking us? Child, they taking us to give last respect to the God. He already understood. Even it was covered up, like they will be put it on trains and moved away. Even there is no railroad at all. But there was rumors what they put railroad there, especially gathering what it was awful. And that's why, guys, please join March of the Living. Come to us. Please go to website
MOTL NewEngland.org. So, which is MOTL is March of the Living, NewEngland.org.
And also you can find this information at centermakor.org. If you can go there, it's very easily, and we will direct you directly to the site of New England March of the Living. And one more time, thank you for being here today and sharing with us this absolutely important movement and trip. And I think not only our kids need to go. I think young adults also, I know, have something like that trip, not maybe right now, but in the future.
As it turns out, I don't run the adult trip, but the guy who took me is running an adult trip this year. Mel Mann, the one in Miami. Only this year, what he does things differently for adults than he does for kids, because usually he adds different cities. So this year he's going to Hungary. So they're going to Budapest and Poland, and in Israel. I've been with him when we went to Vilna and Kovno. So, which was an amazing experience. It was very, very important. In fact, we went to see. We actually visited the farm that saved him. And the father was dead, but the son was still alive, and he was like 90 years old, at the time. So we went to say thank you to him. And what was interesting is when he saw Mel, he said, "You look just like your father," and Mel broke down and cried, immediately when that happened. But what he told him, he said, as a result of what your father did, you saved, I think, 10 of our family members by hiding them. Today, there's 98 of us, because you saved that 10.
And one more time, Earl, thank you. And please, one more time, can you read us website?
Sure, it's MOTL New England.org. MOTL New England.org. And when you get there, you'll see who to contact, phone numbers, emails, registration material, etc. So please join us, send your kids, give me your kids. We'll give them a $2,000 scholarship against the trip, and they'll visit Poland, they'll observe all these holidays, and they will come back stronger Jews than when you first gave them to us. We'll deliver you a much stronger product at the end.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good luck.
Take care.
And I just would like to remind you what you were watching Center Makor on YouTube at our tip-top studio. Just remind you again what it was Vladimir Foygelman with you today, and we supported by combined Jewish philanthropies, donors and sponsors like you, our viewers. And I wish you to have a very, very good day, and welcome back everybody to live from COVID. Thank you. Bye.